There has to be a willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The conversation can't be brought forth and then it's immediately shut down with, well, I am not. So if you're consistently going to take a defensive approach with, oh, well, it's not me, and then everyone else takes that same, well, it's not me either, and the conversation gets consistently shut down, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's collectively all of you.
Ian McLeod here, part 2 of Workplace Diversity, talking with friends and colleagues LeBritney, Nick, and Marc about their experiences and thoughts on diversity.
The biggest obstacle is representation. I keep going back to that as far as just thinking of ways to fix the problems, and it just needs to be more people of color who are, part of the hiring team, part of management.
I think the obstacles to diversity in the workplace are just the presence or lack of presence of people of color and minorities in leadership roles, starting from the top, and not just leadership roles that management, middle management, C-level, but all the way to the top of boards, advisory boards.
So how do we achieve diverse representation? Influencer strategy tells us to find those success stories, positive deviance, and observe to identify vital behaviors that lead to success. Now that's easier said than done, but that's really where you should start. Solutions.
The numbers would need to be more transparent, and then there need to be a group that makes sure that these things, that people of color are hired. I like things like they have in the sports world, like the Rooney Rule in the NFL, where you have to interview a certain number of people of color for head coaching jobs, and maybe if they were put in place in just the general workplace might help with diversity.
I think advisory boards need to make a conscious effort. They should have already been making a conscious effort, but they need to make a conscious effort to see how the top tier decision makers more reflect American society. Because a lot of people are thinking, well, let's go from bottom up. Well, it has to be from top down. Making sure that managers are thinking in consideration of, spotting talent within the ranks to be promoted, going to recruiting before people even get to the point where they're applying, going to historically black colleges and universities. 4.0 at an HBCU is still a 4.0. What's the pipeline look like? Who is getting those opportunities? Are people always going to be bumping against the same walls? Great, you got in the company, but this is your ceiling. If your ceiling is entry level, or your ceiling is mid-level, or your ceiling is junior executive and not vice president or C-level, you have to understand what that ceiling is and how to remove that ceiling and be anti-racist or anti-biased in that respect.
What are you doing with your space at the table when the persons that are demanding space at the table aren't there? Are you using your position then and your voice at that point to check those biases? Or are you equally complicit by not acting in that space when the people who don't have space at the table are not present? Until there's a system of accountability and someone checking someone at the table saying that's not okay.
Am I treating this employee this way because of bias? Or am I overlooking them? Or am I not listening to their voice? Are they not being heard in our group meetings? Are they not being invited to meetings where they could have input that's important?
Make the case for diversity.
When you diversify your work staff, you have varied education, you have varied experience levels, you have varied cultural beliefs, and all of these things come in to create individuals who do things in a very different way. And as you said, it highlights certain strengths. It also highlights blind spots. There are limitations that your lifestyle, your education, your lack of involvement in someone else's strengths may educate you in those blind spots.
When you have those ideas that might be missed from, certain populations, because in the workplace, if you have people who understand what the culture is of the public, then you can have these ideas that match. If you don't have that representation and you don't have a diverse workplace, then you miss out on these opportunities. Yeah, I mean, it can be something that can work. It could be beneficial to both sides.
If there's a shift from negative to positive, now people aren't defensive. Now you're coming from a space of, I want to be a part of the solution. And so now you've got a shift in just the mentality of it. And that's what the heart of this matter is, right? Is the mentality of it. Now you've got a shift and you've got a willingness to want to do the work.
The antithesis to white privilege.
In the African American community, we have this thing called linked fate. And so it's always important for people like myself or anyone, you're not only doing things for yourself, you're doing things for the entire community. And so when you're in the workplace and people see you act a certain way, or you interact with your other coworkers a certain way, you're not just doing it for yourself. Someone doesn't just say, well, look at this guy, the way he's acting. They tend to say, this is how the African American community as a whole acts,
right,
any way that you act. And so that is something that I'm mindful of, and I'm 100% sure that a lot of African Americans are mindful of, and just not just the workplace, but in your interactions with police officers, your interactions at the grocery store. It's everything. It's everywhere you go. You always have to be mindful of this idea that you're putting on for the entire community.
But it is a soul crushing exercise.
I'm sure.
And I'm done. I really am. I mean, the last month my mask is off. And there might be some people that be like, well, I didn't know you felt that way. Like, well, I always have, And
right. But you had to play the role to
fit in.
To be safe, right?
Exactly.
But I have to be willing in my generation to still meet here and have this conversation, because I, as a mother of a 9-year-old African American male, I'm attempting to shape this thing for him, because if I don't, he will in 20 years find himself seated at this same table having this same conversation.
Fear of losing white privilege?
As many solutions as we want to offer, and as many things as we bring to the table as to why and the how and overcoming this, and as many people meet at this table and you create allies and friendships and relationships and collectives that want to move forward, there are always going to be individuals at this table that say, but, as a counter argument to progression. Why are these individuals so easily intimidated? And what little authority they view themselves as having is so easily challenged by someone that is merely not challenging the authority, but asking for clarification or offering opinions on how to improve, or highlighting either strengths or weaknesses. It speaks to something within an individual, a shortcoming, a lacking, and they are using the position that they have as leverage to kind of fill an individual void.
You always have to be leery of the people who want to pull on those on the strings of our differences when there's so much more that we have in common.
Absolutely.
And I feel like those are the people who they use those types of things as a way for them to keep power.
Keeping hope alive.
That's what's different about this time. I mean, for one, I have hope for the first time in my adult life that the changes that we make now can be consistent and long lasting. Now, hopefully they are, but maybe for the first time, people are truly able to see the extent to which people of color, and Black people in particular, have been mistreated for centuries in this country. And maybe now is the time, basically 60 to 70% of Americans think that systemic racism is a real problem.
Right.
And I think the key to that success in the workplace, some executives, some companies are starting to actually at least try to put that in practice.
Where did this start? Is there an end, I guess, in sight?
That's up to all of us. Please watch part 1 of this series for ideas on how to improve diversity in the workplace. Also part 3 for stories on bias.